Why will proponents of America's socialist system of immigration controls never come up with a reform plan that will make their system work? Join Richard Abilene and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we examine that question. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is this week's Libertarian Angle, the show that has brought you all the principal case for the libertarian philosophy for many years now, and a foundation, the FFF, that has brought you the principal case for some 34 years. And I'm joined by my co-host, Richard Abilene, professor of economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again.
Good to see you and to be with our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, so Richard, in the beginning, when we established FFF, you were vice president of academic affairs, and we always said that we were going to take this principled stand on libertarianism and liberty. And part of that, of course, dealt with the area of immigration. And one of the first books we published was a book co-edited by you. I think principally edited by you. I did a little bit of work on it. The Case for Free Trade and Open Immigration, where we had a series of essays that made the case, the moral case, the economic case for Richard. Are you escaping? You're running off me. Okay, there you are. There's our book. Okay. And we caught flack back then for making this principal case for liberty, the right to cross borders, and we've taken flack ever since. But one of the fascinating things about this whole phenomenon, and I've watched it, I guess all my life. I grew up, as you know, in Laredo, Texas, on a farm on the Rio Grande, and I've seen this immigration crisis all my life. And people often forget that. They think, oh, the crisis has just recently happened. Young people might be tempted to think that. No, it's gone on for, 80, 90 years of continuous crisis. And one of the amusing aspects of this whole phenomenon has been the belief among immigration controllers that they're finally going to make this system work. And the New York Times just came out with a new op-ed. Let me see. Let me see if I can pull it up on my cell phone, because it's fascinating because it just reinforces what's been going on for so many years, decades. Here's the title of the op-ed: How to Fix America's Immigration Crisis. Let me see who the author is. I mean, this is just really comical because I've seen this all my life. Stephen Ratner and Maureen White. Ratner served as counsel to the Treasury Secretary in the Obama administration, and Ms. White is a senior fellow at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, specializing in refugee issues. Now, these are obviously smart people, Richard. They have to know that this crisis has been going on for decades, but they are the ones that are finally going to come up with a solution to this crisis. And they've got all these things. One of the principal solutions, sorry for laughing, is to give the immigration and the Border Patrol more money. I mean, like, why didn't somebody think of that before? Or, yeah, that's going to really work. Or limit the categories of asylum so that fewer people can make applications. I mean, I've seen this all my life, Richard, where people come up with various reforms. When the Border Patrol was first established, it consisted of only just, I don't know, a few hundred people. And the idea of bringing it into existence was that when you establish a border control, you're saying certain people cannot come in without permission, official permission. Well, that's like a sign, do not enter. Well, naturally, immigrants, foreigners would just walk around the sign. They didn't care. So they needed a border patrol at that checkpoint to make sure that people complied with the sign. Well, then people started circumventing the sign and trespassing on ranches or farms along the border or whatever. So they had to have an expanded border patrol, and it just grew and grew and grew. And now you got highway checkpoints, and you've got warrantless searches of ranches and farms within 100 miles of the border. And you've got highway checkpoints, roving border patrol checkpoints, boarding Greyhound buses, the criminalization of hiring illegal immigrants. That was a big reform. the criminalization of harboring, helping, transporting. I mean, all of these reforms were supposed to fix the immigration system. And all the time I just kept saying, y'all are wasting your time. You're wasting your time. Now, why do I say that? I say it because, contrary to what Ratner and White and all the other immigration control advocates say, this is not a broken system. I mean, you hear that all the time. The system is broken. No, it's not. It is not a broken system. It is an inherently defective system. And an inherently defective system cannot be fixed by its very nature. And it's inherently defective because it's a socialist system. Socialism is an inherently defective paradigm. It's based on the principle of central planning. You've got the government central planning an economic activity that is in one of the most complex labor markets in history, millions of people. It simply cannot be done. This is what Ludwig von Mises called planned chaos. I mean, what better term to describe the situation down there? And Friedrich Hayek's concept of the fatal conceit of the planner, to think that he can actually do this. But that's the root cause of the crisis. This is what people don't understand. They say, oh, there's open borders down there. People are flooding across. No, you can't have open borders when you have a police state. And there's definitely a police state down there. Go down and you'll see massive presence of the Border Patrol, the Immigration Service, DEA, and all these other groups, deputy sheriffs and stuff, enforcing the border, these highway checkpoints. Open borders is the dismantling of all those things. What you have instead is a system that isn't working. Its purpose of this police state is to limit the number of immigrants to come in legally. That system isn't working. It never has worked. But yet you've got people like Ratner and White and so many others saying, I'll be the one to fix it. I'm going to come up with a plan to make socialism finally work and the immigration police state. Well, it's never going to work, Richard. There's only one solution to this crisis, and that's genuine open borders. Get rid of the immigration service, get rid of the Border Patrol, get rid of all restrictions on the free movements of goods, services, and people across borders. Immediately, the crisis is over. No more crisis. No more police state. No more deaths. No more suffering. It is and I've said this before and it bears repeating, it is the only solution. There is none other. What do you think?
Well, some of the viewers and listeners may remember a Mel Brooks movie called Blazing Saddles, a Western. And there's a scene where a band of thieves and desperados are on their horses going down a desert road. And suddenly, in the middle of the desert road along the path is a gate. And they stop and they're trying to figure out how to open the gate. But of course, there's nothing on the sides. It's like a door frame with a gate. It's just open space. You know, like, how do I get it? Well, of course, this is the thing. And what made it humorous is that you just go around the gate. What kind of jerk are you sitting there with your horses trying to figure out how to open the gate? They can have patrols. They can have a fence. The fact is that when people, due to political oppression, religious persecution, the dire circumstances of dramatically poor economic circumstances from which they wish to escape for themselves and their family, people will find ways to go to where they think they can have a better life. And they will find ways either themselves or paying these black marketeers, which are what the coyotes are, to get into America. And there will be a lot of negative and tragic circumstances. People drowning in a river, dying of thirst and heat stroke in the desert, being brutalized by the traffickers themselves. We've had many of these cases in the news where people are being smuggled in cargo trucks without ventilation or windows, and because the smugglers are being feared of being captured or found out, they leave the cargo truck or van just somewhere, and these people suffocate from the heat and lack of proper oxygen. This is what the system creates, both for those who succeed and those who tragically do not. Certainly, we've seen a lot of these stories and news broadcasts on the evening news of people in Europe who've been attempting to escape for these various similar reasons across the Mediterranean to parts of Europe, and they have drowned. They have in the Mediterranean. Uh, Dead babies have the tides have brought them ashore for people who have suffered this fate. The smugglers abuse them. They make a fortune, then abandon them or put them in these little boats that have little and sometimes no chance of actually making it across to Italy or Spain or Greece. This is the circumstance when the government imposes these restrictions, prohibitions, rules, and regulations. We don't see someone who wants to travel from California to New York dying in the desert or drowning in a river or being smuggled across the country in an unventilated van to be abandoned and to be suffocated in the heat. Why? Because you can travel from California to New York with actually, literally virtually, no restrictions, prohibitions when you cross those state lines. Um, Now, does that mean that everyone in New York likes everyone who comes from California, or every person in Florida likes everyone who comes from Massachusetts or Ohio? Of course not. But the point is the idea that there's an underlying principle. One, freedom of movement of human beings, not to be restrained by political jurisdiction. And the other thing is that it's an elementary premise of freedom. The freedom to move should be viewed as a fundamental right, as much as freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of taking a job, freedom of living where and how you want. Uh, how do you live and pursue a job, a profession, an occupation, reach mutually agreed upon terms of employment without the ability to move where a job is or where you think your family would have a better life? People choose where to work often, not so much because it's the best paying location, but because they think it would be a better, healthier, and more desirable and pleasant place for their children to grow up. Now, if this is true between across the continental United States, why is it any less true with international borders? I'll just use the analogy is that when the U.S. fought its war with Mexico in the 1840s, and the U.S. invaded Mexico and Mexico was defeated, the U.S. annexed 1/3 of what was then the territory of the state of Mexico. There were people in the U.S. Congress who wanted to annex all of Mexico. Now, let's suppose they had annexed all of Mexico, and people were now coming from directly from Mexico City to Dallas or from Baja California to Michigan, or from the Yucatan Peninsula to Oregon. It wouldn't matter because it would all be the same country. And there would be as little restrictions on movement from the Yucatan Peninsula by either car or boat or bicycle or motorcycle or plane to Ohio or to Oregon or to California or Maine or Florida or any other place as we take for granted as Americans within the country. So in a sense, that makes it very clear that if a political decision had been made differently in the 1840s, there would be no border crisis with Mexico because we'd be all one country. It wouldn't matter. Now, let us suppose that California, let's suppose that California were to break away from the United States for whatever political reason the citizens of California would want to break away. Suddenly, there would be border controls, and suddenly it would be dangerous for Californians to enter Nevada or Arizona for these various and sundry types of arguments that are presented today about people from Mexico or other parts of the world. And the Californians would be concerned, well, oh gosh, who's crossing that border from Oregon? You know, have to close have stricter immigration restrictions. Those Nevadans are coming in. That's all sounds ludicrous when it's expressed this way. And I just like to add things besides the freedom argument of it. Let me just put my economist hat on for a moment. And the fact is that division of labor includes the specialization of tasks and the locating of people and enterprises and industries that best fit where people can find the most comparative and absolute advantage to do so. Uh, People are concerned, but too many people are coming. How can we absorb them? Well, we went through well over a century of basically open migration into the United States in the 19th and partly into the beginning of the 20th century, though with some emerging restrictions by then. And the fact is, millions of people came to the United States. when the United States was a much smaller country in terms of population and demographics. And all of those additional hands that came admittedly with an additional mouth to feed also came along with something else, mind. And there was a famous economist named Julian Simon who wrote a book called The Ultimate Resource. What is the ultimate resource? Is it steel? Is it iron ore? Is it platinum? Is it gold? No, he said the ultimate resource is the human mind, the capacity for creativity, innovation, and that comes with every human being in the world, a mind that sees a way of doing something different, better, original, to find a niche and a place to earn an income in the marketplace by serving wants and needs and desires of others in a new way, in a better way, in a less expensive way. And everyone finds their niche. And by adding people to the community participating in the social system of division of labor, not only does the new arrival improve their life, because otherwise why would they be trying to come? But they fill a niche that enables more goods and services to be produced, better goods and services to be produced, less expensive goods and services to be produced, which cumulatively improves the condition of all those participating in this. At one level, we participate in terms of goods and services and investment in an international division of labor. And we all gain from this at the end of the day. The free movement of people would be adding that complement that is inescapably part of it. Labor, as well as resources and saved capital and raw materials or manufacturing. These things should go where it is most productive, most efficient, as well as personally most desirable. And at the end of the day, we'll all benefit as members of the human community, including those who reside in this area called the United States.
Wow. Well, that was quite an eloquent presentation. I think it matches your essays in the Case for Free Trade and Open Immigration, the book that we we published some decades ago. And you've raised really some great issues. First of all, let me address that point you raised about the black market transporters, because I saw them when I was practicing law down there on the border. You're right; they're called coyotes, and they're people that are just making money. They're in the black market. They don't care one whit about the welfare of their clients. I mean, this is the way the black market works. And so people dying in the backs of tractor trailers for asphyxiation. And what's fascinating is that whenever this happens, the immigration controllers go on the rampage. Oh, what a terrible person. He needs to be sent up. And they do. They prosecute him, they convict him, and they send him up for decades for having done this. But what they never acknowledge is that it's their system that has brought this black market into existence. They bear full moral responsibility, as far as I'm concerned, for these deaths, Richard, because if you didn't have the system, you wouldn't have these black market transporters. And your point about state borders is fantastic, because we live in the greatest free trade and free movement zone in history. We can go 3,000 miles continuously and never run into a border guard. And we all just take this for granted because it's what we were born and raised under. But it didn't have to be that way. It very well could have been that the framers of the Constitution said, no, each state will have the power to establish travel restrictions and trade controls to protect the people of that state from terrorists or people with sicknesses or criminals and so forth. So we're just going to let you control who comes into the state. Well, today, I don't know how many people cross back and forth between Maryland and Virginia every day, but the cars over there, if you go by the Beltway, it's got to be hundreds of thousands every day, back and forth. Nobody keeps track, nobody checks. Now imagine if suddenly the government said, okay, we're going to now let states control who comes in. So you got border guards now there at the bridges leading between the bridge across the Potomac between Maryland and Virginia. Well, immediately there'd be huge backups of traffic. And people would be figuring out ways to circumvent it. And people would be saying, there's a crisis, do something. And everybody would be coming up with solutions. Well, if we get more border guards and we pay them better, that'll alleviate the problem. Or maybe build new bridges. We'll have a lot more bridges. And in other words, you'll see the same thing you do on the southern border. And along comes a libertarian and says, why don't we just open the borders between Maryland and Virginia? And you can imagine the outcry. Oh my gosh, you libertarians are so impractical. That would be chaotic to have open borders between Virginia and Maryland. But another example of this phenomenon is, as there's been countless Californians moving into Austin, Texas in the last several years. Well, do you see a crisis? Do you see a chaos? Do you see all the things you see on the southern border? No. You see a big influx. Are people having to adjust to that? Better infrastructure and so forth? Yeah. But everybody handles it. Everybody adjusts because there's the price system there. As more people come in, prices of homes start rising. People start moving to the suburbs or other parts of the United States. The price system in the free market is a great regulator of this. I think it's also important to point out that just because you have people coming into the United States doesn't mean that makes them American citizens. They retain their citizenship. They just come over here to tour, travel, vacation, work, invest, what have you. I mean, today there's more than 1 million Americans living in Mexico. Most of them are not assimilating. They're not learning Spanish, and there's no problem. You don't say, "Oh my gosh, this is so bad that all these Americans are living in Mexico. They should become Mexican citizens." Ridiculous. If they don't want to become Mexican citizens, why should they be forced to? And it's the same with this. People want to come into the United States to work seasonally or whatever, return to Mexico or whatever, then they should be free to do so. Now, let me bring up a different point here, though. And that is that this massive immigration flow that we've been seeing is in large part a big factor in that is U.S. foreign policy. And this is what immigration control advocates also do not want to acknowledge, because it entails criticizing the federal government, which they're loath to do normally. But if you look at the sanctions, for example, that are imposed against countries like Venezuela or Nicaragua, I mean, it's not just Nicaragua, the socialist systems in these countries like Venezuela that causes this horrible economic crisis where people are really facing starvation. It's the sanctions that contribute to this. And so you've got this economic sanction imposed by the U.S. government, creating terrible economic hardship, starvation. People say, I'm going to save the lives of my family. I'm going to save my life. I'm going to go to where the opportunities are the greatest, which happens to be the United States. And everybody gets up in arms. Oh, those Venezuelans, it's terrible. And then they force them back into Venezuela so they can die from starvation because they haven't achieved regime change there and put in the dictator that the U.S. wants. We also see it with the drug war. I mean, a lot of these people are fleeing violence from the drug war, Richard, narcotics gangs and so forth. That's the U.S. That the U.S. will not permit these Latin American countries to legalize drugs in the drug war. It imposes this program on them, and the result is massive exodus out of those countries. And then everybody laments, "Oh, look at all the immigrants coming in," and you say, "Well, why don't we just legalize drugs and end the drug war?" "Oh my gosh, no, Jacob, that would be terrible. We need these government programs to keep us safe." So here you have the anomaly where the government creates the problem and then makes the problem even worse by instituting a police state along the border that destroys liberty and creates the death and suffering that you were talking about.
Another element of this, the human element, is that I would ask many of our viewers and listeners to reflect back on what they know about their own family histories. When did your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents come to the United States? Now, was there slavery? Of course, but the vast majority of people who live in the United States today are the descendants of those who freely chose to came to America in the tens of millions over the 250 years of this country's history. They were escaping from the same things: religious persecution, political oppression, lack of economic opportunities because of the activities of their domestic government in the home country. And ask yourself, where would you be today yourself if such immigration restrictions had existed when your parents or grandparents or great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents wanted to come to America? Where would you be here today? You might not even be alive. You might be living in a society that is ruled by an authoritarian regime. You might have been killed or tortured or imprisoned yourself, or certainly one of your ancestors might have been. And where would that have left you as a human being today if you had even come into existence? And ask yourself this: oh, immigrants come and then their kids come and we oh, it's terrible. Do you feel that America is a poorer country, a less desirable country, uh, a culturally degenerate country because your ancestors came to America? In other words, you think America is worse off because you're here and your descendant and your ancestors came here? No. I would have presumed that you think that it was great that your ancestors came here, made a life for themselves, even if their life wasn't made into olive cherries, their kids and grandkids, and you had a better life. And that by coming here and improving their life and your life, they've improved the lives of everyone else in America. Why would you want to deny the same choice and opportunity and chance to improve America's future by locking out others who want to do nothing else than your own ancestors wanted to do and had the opportunity to do?
That's a great point. But you know, it's often said, Richard, oh, but they're going to destroy America's culture. They're going to pollute America's culture. What are they talking about? You know, what is our culture? I mean, is our culture the culture that I grew up in Laredo, Texas, where 98% of the inhabitants were Mexican American? Because Laredo was part of the Mexico that the US stole in the Mexican War. And I don't think there's any better word for it than stole. Imagine people lament today immigrants coming in from Mexico. This was the acquisition of the entire northern half or northern third of Mexico,
Yes,
along with all the Mexican citizens that were
yes,
automatically made American citizens when the absorption took place.
yes.
But in Laredo, the customs, the culture is very much different from the rest of the world, rest of the country. I mean, I would venture to say that most conversations during the day are in Spanish. A lot of people, a large percentage, cannot read or write English. Is that the culture that's going to get polluted or destroyed? Or we can go to New Orleans in the French Quarter. Is that the culture they're talking about? Are they talking about Little Italy in New York? Are they talking about San Francisco culture? The fact is that our culture is one of liberty and diversity. That's our culture. And that liberty and diversity is in large part, as you point out, based on our heritage of open immigration. You go all the way back to the Declaration of Independence. One of the reasons for that Declaration of Independence, the separation of the colonies from the British Crown, which was their government. This was the English government, was not a foreign government. It was their government. And one of the reasons for the separation was that King George had restricted immigration into the colonies. And then when after the Constitution called the federal government into existence, there was, for all practical purposes, open borders. There was that inspection station at Ellis Island, but it wasn't much of a filter. It became a barrier as the decades passed on. But is in the Southwest, after the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the border between the United States and Mexico was totally open. And you didn't see the United States falling into the ocean or the Rio Grande drying up. It was a system where people could just interact with each other and freely cross a political line called a border. And
That,
finally, I should say, you know, sometimes people say, oh, well, we have a right to control our homeland, just like somebody controlling their home. Well, no, they're thinking Cuba. In Cuba, the government owns everything, and so it's natural for people to think of a national homeland. Here, our system is based on private property, private ownership. So if you have a home and you have a business and you want to exclude foreigners from your business, that's your right. But you don't have any right to prevent me from inviting who I want into my home and my business. That's the principle of private ownership and free markets.
freedom of movement is inseparable from all other freedoms. In fact, it is inseparable because how can we even talk about the motions, the actions of an individual if it does not affect location? I'm standing here, now I'm standing here. I go here, I go there. I move here, I move there. I choose to live in one place, I choose to work in another. And just because governments have drawn arbitrary lines on a political map doesn't mean that it should be allowed to stand in the way of that peaceful movement of people to where they want to live, earn a living, and raise their children.
All right. On that great note, we'll wrap things up. Richard, greatly enjoyed the conversation as always. Thank you all for tuning in. Thanks for your great support of our work here at FFF. And Richard, I look forward to talking to you next week.
Until next time.